Since 2010, when Pete Carroll was hired as coach, John Schneider hired as general manager, the Seahawks, they've been one of the most aggressive teams in the league in terms of their roster construction. But aggressive is different from risky. And that's what makes this season's acquisition of Percy Harvin so much different, so much of kind of a template breaker for these Seahawks. Because for all the roster moves Seattle made in the first 2 years, really even 3 years under that duo of Schneider and Carroll, they were really marked by, there wasn't that much downside. Sure, they took chances. They brought Mike Williams back after he'd been out of the league for 2 years. They signed a cornerback in Brandon Browner who played 4 years in the CFL. They even changed quarterbacks, going from Matt Hasselbeck to Tavares Jackson. But the one thing you could always see is that the risk, the downside of those moves, was minimized. They weren't giving up massive groups of picks to move up in the draft. In fact, they most frequently moved down. When they signed a guy, it was generally for shorter term money. They did make some investments in players like Sidney Rice and Zach Miller, but it was far more frequent for them to take lower budget, more cost-effective additions, even as they were churning through 250 some roster decisions in that first year. That's what makes Harvin's acquisition so much different. This is a team that values draft picks. They've only traded up once, and yet they gave up 3 different picks, including this year's first rounder, to acquire Harvin. And acquiring Harvin was just the start, because then they chose to pay him a top shelf receiver contract. So what can we say to that? This is probably the biggest risk this team has taken. The only thing else that's even in the conversation was choosing to start Russell Wilson over Matt Flynn last year. But even then, I'd say that was based on performance. It was based on what they'd seen in the preseason. And the downside of that, if Russell Wilson hadn't worked, you still had Matt Flynn on the roster. You still could have substituted him in. This is different. They see Percy Harvin as a top 10 offensive playmaker, kind of a non-quarterback among the most dangerous players in the league. And they saw that as willing to work, taking the chance that if this doesn't work out, you are talking about burning some high-end draft choices in addition to quite a bit of guaranteed money. So in terms of risk, well, Seattle's aggression this time, there is a downside to it.